So thank you for joining us today for a distance hybrid learning update. My name is Adam Ibrahim. I am CTA staff person for Region 1 in the Instruction and Professional Development Department. We're going to introduce you to our guests and our another guest shortly here. But just to talk a little bit about where you have landed. The idea for this session came about from a book by Santiago Rincon Gallardo. And from an article in a book, which is hyperlinked down here, and you can access it. And sort of in his, one of the sort of the pieces that he talks about is that learning is a practice of freedom, that the pedagogical is political, and that good policy is about equal. I learned that that's what that symbol represents to good pedagogy, and that school and context should be changed in equal measure. And so I used this slide these ideas in a presentation with Rosie actually, and kind of thought that this would be a really kind of good way to frame an ongoing discussion with association staff leadership and practitioners around Region 1. And so that's where you found yourself today. This is a 3-part series. We're going to try it out. We're going to be talking about hot topics, education issues at the policy level, and looking on down to practice and how they play out, and everything in between. So with that, I would like to welcome today's speakers. We have Dan Reynolds, who is the Executive Director of the Mount Diablo Education Association. And we have Rosie Reed, who is a National Board Certified Teacher, 2019 Teacher of the Year, and an English Language Development Teacher at Ignacio Valley High School in Concord, California. Welcome. So here's our agenda today. We're gonna start with John Green, CTA staff from Oakland, who's going to talk to us a little bit about Proposition 15, and then we're going to move into some discussion around instruction, engagement, and re-engagement, and then we're gonna end by deconstructing this notion of self-care, this idea of wellness, and how it's sort of been framed and talked about at the state level, how it's actually played out. And so that's going to be kind of where we leave off, and then also offer some invitations to kind of continue the conversation at other venues. All right, so with that, I would like to hand it off to Mr. John Green.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I'm just going to take a moment of your time for a really important topic that I know many of you have already discussed with your colleagues, and very much appreciate you being a part of those discussions. When we talk about Proposition 15, we're talking about in California, corporations like Chevron and IBM are still paying the same property tax rate that they paid back in the 1970s. And what that means is that we don't have the funds then for our schools, for our public health departments, for our firefighters, because we have this property tax structure that is privileging these companies with these legacy properties throughout the state. Prop 15, if it's approved by voters, will raise $12 billion a year by closing the corporate tax loophole that allows Chevron and IBM and other companies to pay those 1970s rates that the rest of us don't get to pay. Prop 15, as you know, protects small businesses. Businesses under $3 million are exempt. There's new tax breaks worth $1 billion for small businesses. That's going to be great statewide during this COVID recession. Prop 15 protects homeowners and renters. And that money that's raised, 40% of it goes to schools. And I'm sure that everyone on this call right now has a list of things that their students deserve in their schools, whether it is better technology during remote learning, additional custodial staff for safety moving forward, better enrichment in summer school programs to address learning loss over the next couple of years. These are the things that we could do with Proposition 15 that we can't do if we don't get more funding. Election day is 21 days away. It feels like we have been in election mode for 2 years with all the primaries going on, but it's literally 3 weeks away now. It's nearly done. So we're asking everyone on this call to please commit to voting yes on Prop 15, but much more importantly than your vote is asking you to also talk to your friends and family. This is a statewide ballot measure, right? So it's not just folks in the Bay Area or Northern California. It's the Central Valley, it's Southern California. So if you have friends or family, college roommates, folks you went through your teacher education program through If you can reach out to them today and let them know why you are supporting Prop 15, it is critically important to us that we get it out there statewide, because this is going to have an enormous positive impact on our community services and our schools. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. If any of you haven't filled it out already, we would very much appreciate just knowing that you as a CTA member are supporting Prop 15. That allows us to take you off the list of folks that we are phone banking every night, so that we can really focus on folks out there who have not heard of Prop 15 that we're trying to reach. Thank you.
Great. And I also dropped in a link, and it's available. We'll share this slide deck with you also. And so one of the links on the slide deck is to the, and it's also in the chat, is to the calculator. And the calculator is just a fantastic way in your conversations to sort of make it real, to put a dollar amount on how much schools would receive. So let's take a look at Oakland Unified. So that would be an additional $25 million. So this is a pretty important, especially with the sort of the decline in, with the decline in state revenues sort of hitting next year. This is something that, as John put it, will take the edge off. It's not enough, but it's something, and it's critical. All right, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about instruction. So a little bit of a sort of a step back in time. I don't know when it was for you, but I think I sort of take March 13th as the day that sort of things really started to change. We realized that that COVID was really going to start to profoundly impact and change things for the foreseeable future. And sort of since between March 13th and the end of the school year, all sorts of emergency actions happened, executive orders, all of those pieces were rolled up in Senate Bill 98 over the summer, which had a lot of provisions in it. It generated new education code around sort of what this world of instruction engagement would look like in the era of COVID. And so what I have here is just kind of, this is a brief synopsis. This is a resource for you. It kind of talks a little bit about some of the requirements from SB 98. We're not going to spend a ton of time on the requirements, but just to kind of refresh your memories that, we started to talk about how many instructional days in a new year, in an academic year in the era of COVID. What do instructional minutes look like? How many? And then how are they divided in, between synchronous and asynchronous? These new words started to flood our vocabularies. And then, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But, this notion of how are we tracking daily participation, weekly engagement, that seemed to be a particular pain point for teachers across the state. But I think my first question here is for Dan, and it's, how did these, when you kind of look at it, you think back about coming off of the summer and all of these requirements going into the new year, sort of how did this, what was how did this play out in your local association?
Sure, thank you, Adam. One of the things that so many of us felt right away as we started the new school year were the differences between what we did in the spring and what the fall was going to look like. In the spring, we were immediately responding to this crisis, and the state was saying, we know we've got to do what we can. But with the passage of SB 98 and with time over the summer, the state said, there's a lot of things that we're going to want to see in the fall. Some of them were a return to expectations, and some of them were giving us new expectations. Like, Ed code is still there. SB 98 changes some of it, but so much of what's in Ed code is still there and still a requirement. We still have to be teaching board-approved curriculum. And so what that looks like in this new moment, right, in the 2021 school year, what it looks like to try and do 100% distance learning in many situations, in many schools across our region and across the state, right? The majority of California's public education students started the year in distance learning. And so to do that with new expectations from the state that the instruction was going to be board-approved curriculum. When we were in the classroom, we had easier access to textbooks and to the supplemental materials that our students needed. Now in the fall, there was a continued scramble of how am I going to provide board approved curriculum to my students if I don't have that curriculum in a digital setting. Some of us, it meant we got digital access to board approved textbooks and supplemental materials. Others of us, it meant we had to go and identify what those materials were going to be. I've got to find some standards aligned online assignment that I could have my students do and figure out how I can have them turn it in and grade it. Or if it wasn't something that the district provided and it wasn't something we were able to find on our own, teachers had to go out and create their own curriculum that was standards aligned that they could assign to the students. And so it was this massive shift. One of the things that I remember from my credentialing program was they say it takes 3 years roughly to build a curriculum, right? To teach that same course over the span of 3 years, to understand what you want to assign and why and how, to work out the bugs so that you know what you're doing for your students, why you've thoroughly connected it to the outcomes that you desire for the students, and you as a teacher know how to pace and work through the ups and downs in it, as well as what aspects to teach and reteach. We don't have that 3 years in this moment, but so many of us are doing this same thing of kind of creating a new approach to our curriculum. It is more work. Right? For us as educators, it is more learning. When I talk to people, right, people are doing more professional reading than they ever have. And there is more synthesis of pedagogy and practice than almost any other time in our career. I would say for me, this matches that first year when I was in a credential program and doing student teaching, having to read these things and process them, synthesize them, and develop how those would look in a classroom setting. So many of our educators across the state are doing something very similar to that, but it's because we're having to reevaluate all of our approaches because this is not the education that so many of us trained for or have experience with. So, Adam, I'll pitch it back over to you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And I think that's there's a before I hand it off to Rosie, I wanted to kind of just touch on this notion of the daily participation and weekly engagement log. And Dan, you mentioned that in your association, you all were kind of ahead of the curve here. You saw this kind of coming down the pike. You got into the education code. You saw kind of what it would mean, and you were able to kind of get out front of it. I would say on a sort of statewide level, the California Teachers Association, we heard very loud and clear from our members that this was something that right at that moment, as you pointed out, Dan, when teachers were, experiencing, this sort of massive sort of crunch of professional learning, of standing up curriculum, recreating curriculum, they were also sort of being tasked with accounting for the daily participation and weekly engagement of students in a way that across the state was quite onerous. And we're talking about the California Department of Education, in order to help sort of districts, LEAs track this, put out a fillable PDF, which is, the irony of the state agency putting out a fillable PDF in the age of distance learning is, hopefully not lost on us or the audience. But to their credit, they heard pretty quickly, and I would say from everybody, that to include AXA and the and CSESA and some of the other groups, that this was a burden. This was hard. And so what you see here is California Teachers Association. We spent a lot of time working with the CDE to surface, what were the districts that got this right doing. What did it look like in a way to where it was not diverting effort, energy away, from teaching under these insane conditions? And so one of the examples, and I'm just kind of putting this on the deck for those of you that, may be in the audience and still experiencing a process that is tough, right? So if you find yourself spending more than 15, 20 minutes a day, I believe, Dan, you said you guys have it down to about 10 minutes a week.
we polled our members and they told us that once we were able to put our version of this in place, it took them the majority of them 6 to 10 minutes a week to fill out their weekly engagement record.
So CDE, they agreed to sort of provide some updated guidance on alternatives. There are options that they provide on their frequently asked questions, and they produced a guide on how those alternatives could play out, including what I would argue should have been put out in the first place, which is a very simple stripped down template, which was an example provided to us by Lawndale Unified, by the educators in Lawndale. So that's there for you if you're still sort of experiencing that. Please do follow up. It's not, there are ways where it need not be so onerous. All right, so enough of that. Enough of the daily participation and weekly engagement records. So this was this quote. This was an actual conversation between Rosie and myself about. I think Rosie, was the beginning of the year, right?
It was the first week. It was the first. And I had gone to like all of the PD on like, how to build community and how to do this. I spent my whole summer going to webinars and I had all my curriculum ready, and Adam knew I was like super geared up. It's the end of the first week and he asks,
how was your week?
all black screens and everyone's on mute. What do you do?
All black. And so I was hoping that I thought I'd bring this back, and I was hoping that you would update us on kind of how things have gone in the instructional realm since all black screens went on mute.
I mean, I would say there's been some progress. I don't know what my next slide was, but if you want to move on to the next slide. I would say that,
clicker. Just tell me when to advance a slide.
I had say that I've had some teeny tiny classroom victories. Overall, I would say this has been exceptionally hard. I'm sure every teacher here can tell you that it's the hardest thing ever. But I have found some really good ways to make connections with my students. At the end of the class, my kids do not turn on their cameras. I don't know who your kids are. Maybe they turn their cameras on, but I teach high school. They don't turn their cameras on, right? So nobody has their camera on. At the end of the class, I started saying after about a week or two, like, come on, turn on your camera. Give me a wave goodbye. And a lot of kids will just give me their hand waving. But then gradually, a lot of kids started showing me their face. So even though they had their camera off the whole time, they started waving to me. And that way, at least I had an image of who this child was. I made a lot of positive phone calls home. Takes a long time, but I tried to do at least 5 a week of positive phone calls home. That really, really helped a lot. And in feedback on papers, we'll talk a lot more about workload and stuff too. And every kid who comes in, I try to say good morning to them by name. And they almost all say good morning back to me with their voice, which is improvement. At first they were ignoring me or maybe putting it in the chat, but they almost all say, good morning to me with their voices, which is nice. I really pushed hard to get a thriving office hours down because I felt like I was spending all of my time responding to like 200 student emails a day and 200 comments in Google Classroom. So for about a week, every day I'd start class saying, okay, how do you communicate with me? If you have a question that's longer than a sentence answer, well, if it's a 1 sentence answer, you can email me. Do not give me comments in Google Classroom because I don't see them. There's like too many notifications, right? So it's either an email or it's going to be an office hours visit if it's longer than 1 sentence. And now I have this really thriving office hours. We have PBIS, so I give students a point every time they come. And some kids are just like shamelessly coming to like get a point, but it's helped really build community. I would say I have decent engagement. Like if I ask a question, a lot of the kids will respond, some don't, and some have truly never come, right? I have semi-functional breakout rooms. I'm saying this all like because it's progress. Like I feel like I've gotten somewhere, and it's hard to like lower my standards, but I feel like things are getting better, and so that is important for me to remember when I go home. And it is really hard. I'd say that one benefit that's come out of this is that I have been trying to use an equity framework for grading, and that conversation has gone a lot better with colleagues. We've been having a lot of conversations as a school. I've been seeing a lot more of this online, and I think that's really a wonderful thing that might come out of this. I'm not giving zeros. I've always taken late work, but late work without penalty, those things have become more standardized, and I think that's a really great thing. I'm seeing more people moving to standards-based grading, giving students opportunities to redo assessments, so that's really great. And I'd say one more positive thing is that me and a lot of the people I know have just gotten a lot more tech savvy. Like I was Google certified before, but really I could kind of use the Google suite. And now it's like I have a student who's having trouble. Let me just make a quick Loom for you. And I had kids who couldn't log in on Friday. And so I made a Loom. Like, if you still can't log in, let me just show you how to consolidate your Zoom account on MDOSD so that way you won't have any trouble with any of your classes anymore. And then like 18 kids viewed it that day. So like clearly there was a need for it. So one benefit of coming out of this is that, like Dan was saying, there's a ton of professional reading, there's a ton of professional learning, but I'm seeing that that is going to help me as I move forward. So the cost, though, if you could just go to the next slide, Adam, is that I'm working so much. And it's like I'm laughing, but I'm kind of crying. Like and I'm not proud of this. We're going to get to this in the end. Like, I often try to really disguise the amount of work I'm having to do, because as a Medea rep, as a union rep, I don't think teachers should have to be working this hard. So there's no part of me that's wearing this as like a martyr badge. I don't think we should have to be working this hard. But 12-hour days, working like a lot of every weekend. I miss my kids, even though they're with me all the time. I have 6 kids. Did I mention that? I have 6 kids. They all have their own distance learning, and like they're across the room doing their distance learning with their little headsets, and they're with me all the time, but I don't ever see them. So that's a weird thing. My husband is a teacher too in the same school district, so I don't really see him. I have not gotten this many headaches, and I don't know if it's the smoke or the stress, but I have had headaches a lot of days, and I'm not sure why. I often skip lunch and I just like power through, and I eat some chicken sandwich that the kids grabbed from the free lunch bar, and I'm having trouble sleeping. And this is maybe just a lot to share, but like these are real problems that I didn't always have, where I'm waking up at 3 a.m, really stressed about work in ways that I didn't really do before. And I feel really sad about the prospect of this going on for a really long time. I also feel really sad about the prospect of coming back. That seems even scarier to me. So like it's a lot of negative thoughts. And then this one is really big. I've never thought about leaving the classroom before, but I have had a lot of thoughts of like, maybe it's time for me to do something else. Maybe this is too much for me where I am right now. And, there's like a posting that came up recently that was like, looking for a teacher coach for new teachers. And I was like, oh, maybe I should go do that. And I'm not going to, but it's the first time I've really thought about it. And I've been teaching for almost 20 years. So pass it back to you, Adam.
I was having I'm sure that is real, and I'm sure that a lot of people feel that. I was having a discussion with an HR professional in a district who was saying like that some of the teachers in the district that have been just pillars, right? Instructional leaders, pillars of the district are on leave, are sort of at wit's end, and he wishes that he could just put out informal communication like, it's okay to let some things go, right? It's okay to sacrifice some things in order to preserve your sanity, which we're going to get to in a moment. Dan, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did. Before we jump into our talk about engagement and re-engagement,
yeah,
one of the things that I have the privilege of doing now as a CTA staffer is working with educators to organize, to improve our working conditions and students' learning conditions. I spent 16 years as a classroom teacher before I went into CTA staff work, and understanding what it means to be a classroom educator who is always looking for more support from the district, more support via resources. Rosie, hearing the things that you talked about, right? The costs of the work that we're doing, educators all over are paying those costs now, many of them more than they ever have. And I feel in my role now that one of the positive ways that we can respond to those things is by putting those out there and organizing around them. Now, I understand that when I say that, what I'm saying is the organizing takes work, and that a lot of people feel the added weight because I'm already doing all of these things. And now someone is telling me that I can put in more work to organize to address these things. But one of the things that why I want to put it out there now and then revisit it at the end when we're talking about self-care, is that when our organizing efforts pay dividends, when we win, what we are doing is we are improving our working conditions, we're improving students' learning conditions, we are getting us the resources that we need, whether it's new things for the classroom from the district, whether it's them finally providing a full digital curriculum and therefore freeing up my time to not have to create everything myself, whether it's getting people the raise they need to be able to pay the bills that they still have through all of this. When we win those organizing victories, it can be one of the things that helps us get through the day without having to pay so many costs. But I do understand that when I say that, right, that there are costs to those efforts as well.
Thank you. And, maybe we don't want to spend too much time here. I think there are some important pieces. I mean, from that perspective of burden, of workload, that do kind of swirl around this notion of engagement and re-engagement. A challenge that the districts, that teachers, that everybody is dealing with is sort of the varying degrees of engagement, whether you have students that are not turning on their cameras, not turning in assignments. Ostensibly, they're some form of present, but it's hard to detect what form of present they are. To students that have not signed in or logged in at all this year, and what are districts, what are teachers, what are we trying to do in order to engage and re-engage them? And so to kind of start at the just to touch back to Senate Bill 98, to sort of in this case, Ed Code Section 43509, I believe, which is connected to the learning continuity plans. There is a section in there on people and family engagement and outreach. And I mentioned the learning continuity plans because this plan had to have been approved by the boards in your local education agencies, by September 30th. And there are some sections. We're going to reference one in the kind of upcoming health and wellness section. It's worth sort of seeing what the district is putting on the record as what they're going to be doing. And one of the pieces here is around tiered engagement, is around an engagement process or system where there is a written plan that documents how they're going to engage students that are varying degrees of disengaged, rather. And so rather than do this activity here, I think what we're going to do instead is we're going to ask a question for the chat. And the question is this: when it comes to connecting with families and students that are absent for maybe 3 days out of the week, right, or more, do you have help? This is a simple yes or no question. Do you have people that are helping you re-engage students that are absent, that are missing? And if so, who? And if no, then we know. Okay. And if you want to send it to, if you want the attendees to see, you can select to all panelists and attendees.
Adam, can I jump in here?
Please do. Yes.
As people are able to put their responses in the chat, some of you may be thinking, who is there to help with these things? And in some ways, I want us to think about what things were like in the before times. Before March 13th, how did these re-engagement strategies function, right? How did we connect with students who were absent 3 or more days a week? How did we engage with students who were not turning in any work? And that while SB 98 says you must have clearly and explicitly defined engagement and re-engagement strategies for students who miss 3 days a week or more, etc., there were districts all over who thought that this was something new, who treated it like something new. And even worse, there were districts who said, okay, teachers, this is all your work now. And we're seeing some of that in the answers in the chat. But there's the simple answer is no, I don't have any support. But for places where there is an attendance secretary, or where the office manager has one of their tasks being following through on daily attendance, that is someone whose work can help in re-engagement strategies. If we are in a district or a school site where there are counselors, it may be part of the counselor's job to assist with students who are not turning in work or who are failing classes. And so as we start to think about who is there to help us with these things, and the chat is full of these answers, right? Site admin, district admin, site-based classified, site certificated staff like counselors, right? There are also things that classroom teachers have always done that we continue to do. And there are a few places where districts have seen this crisis moment as an opportunity for them to increase in real ways, right, re-engagement, and have potentially created new positions. In Mount Diablo Unified, where I am the CTA staffer and where Rosie teaches, they did not do that. But one of the things they did do through budget cuts in the spring was not cut people who were providing some of these resources. They attempted to keep as many of the counselors as they could, because they knew that the work that those counselors do is important. We did not get to keep all of them, right? There were large amounts of cuts in the spring, and we know that in some districts this year, there will be more cuts in the spring of 2021 in the lead into the 21-22 school year. But for each of us, when we think about engagement and re-engagement strategies, right, what were we doing in the before times? What are we doing now? And what real supports are there? And I think I've chatted long enough that everyone has had a chance to put their answer into the chat.
Appreciate that. And then I think, you kind of talked about you kind of pulled out some of those different roles, different people that are available to support. But Rosie, in our kind of discussion, was sort of bringing up this idea of, there's an equity issue here in terms of who you're supporting and how that impacts like how you need to re-engage them, or the cost of re-engagement rather. So Rosie, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a unique position of having changed schools this year. So last year I worked at a school in our district. These schools are 2 miles apart. So we know the legacy of redlining in California and particularly the Bay Area. But I used to work at a school that was 12% socioeconomically disadvantaged students, 1% English learners, 8% students with disabilities, 96% graduation rate. Everyone's scoring, not everyone, most kids are scoring above target on your standardized tests. And I had made a decision that I wanted to work in a different environment. And I made that decision pre-COVID, and I'm not sorry I made that decision, but I wanted to look at my population now and think about how 80% of my students are socioeconomically disadvantaged. So thinking about what that means for them in the home when they're trying to do their schoolwork. A lot of times they'll come unmuted accidentally, and I hear just like so many people in the background, many students living together in a very small space. Almost all my students, the parents I've talked to, I say, so, why are they not coming to class? And the parents say, I don't know, I'm at work, they're home unsupervised. So a lot of my students' parents do not have the kind of white collar job where they're now working remotely from home and can be keeping tabs on their kid. Their kid is unsupervised and not getting into their classes. And I have a lot of English learners, so that's a lot more differentiation. It's also a lot harder to communicate when I call home. More students with special needs, and most of my students are working, below standard. And so going from a place where most of my students did most of their work most of the time to a school where that is not the case. And so thinking about this from an equity perspective, looking at the students' needs, that's a super, super important thing for us to think about. But thinking about how have resources been allocated to our various schools to deal with this re-engagement. So I saw in the first slide you had out, it talked about like supervising students being under the direct supervision of a student, or, well, there's no supervision of a student. They can log in and turn off and go back to bed, right? And so if I have a kid who's been coming to class regularly and I has had no work turned in, I have seen no evidence of learning, then whose job is it? Because if that kid hadn't been coming to class at all, the office would call. But if that kid is coming to class, then it becomes my responsibility to reach out to all of those students. And that has been a back and forth with my administration of, you guys need to call all of these students. And there's always that phrase, that weaponized phrase, what's best for kids, right? As soon as they pull that out, it's like, you got to, you don't have to do it, but it's what's best for kids. So there's been a lot of that. And then it's like, well, you don't have to, but you should, right? Like if you were a good person, you would. And that's really the undertone of the situation. So, yeah, thinking about like how from the state level, I am curious to see, has there been additional resourcing to those schools that need a lot more help with that tiered re-engagement? Because I'm not seeing it on my end.
Yeah. Okay, so this section went from self-care and wellness to kind of deconstructing this notion of self-care. And so, we're gonna skip the poll everywhere, and we're gonna just kind of ask the question. And I'll talk a little bit about. I'll use Dan's sort of strategy of talking a little bit about this piece and kind of how it's surfacing in plans, while I ask you a question and see what you put in the chat. So the question is this: what are the factors? Assuming that there is a degree of strain and burnout amongst you and your colleagues, and this is for you in the audience, what are some of the factors that are driving that in your local context? What are the things that are really pushing people? And so, if you have a thought of some of the factors that are really pushing burnout, could you just go ahead and throw them in the chat? And then I'll kind of touch on this piece right here, which is, looking at, this is another snapshot from the learning continuity plans. And this is a prompt that is buried kind of in the plan. I'll tell you what's buried in here. It's not this, because when I read in preparation for this, or as kind of background to this, I read through a number of learning continuity plans to kind of look at how they've responded to this prompt. And, this part in particular, looking at, the LEA needs to provide how they're going to monitor and support the mental health and social and emotional well-being of pupils and staff during the school year, including professional development, resources. And so I just kind of picked a selection of districts kind of from around the area, and I saw a range. So I saw a range of, there were some districts that had sort of fully elaborated sections of, if you're struggling, these are the resources we could provide. Here are the hotlines. Here are the resource centers. Here are the things. Here's some, they had like pretty well fleshed out sections. And then I saw some where there was an extensive section on sort of what needs to be done for the students, and little to literally no explanation of what was going to be done, to support staff. And then I saw some where there was just sort of kind of offhand mentions. But, this would be another thing that if you're in your district, probably the last board item before September 30th is going to carry the learning continuity plan. They're also required to post it. Check it out. Look at the section on mental health and social and emotional well-being, and, kind of take a look at it, see what the district says they're doing to support kind of staff. I think that, I don't know, Dan, did you want to kind of talk about maybe some organizing opportunities around this, or this?
Yes.
How much?
Thank you, Adam. When we started our conversation today talking about instruction and how we are approaching the instruction that we provide our students, and when it comes to instruction, the teachers whom I have known over the last 20 years try. When it comes to how I'm educating the students in my class, teachers put in the hours, they research, they find the right lesson plan, they talk to one another, they borrow, they create their own, they assess and reassess to make them even better. Teachers try. When it comes to engaging students, which is the second of the things that we talked about, teachers try. Right? They try to engage students. They try to make those phone calls home. They try and quickly respond to student emails or those of their parents. They work to be responsive in virtual office hours. When it comes to the number of teachers whom I have known over the last 20 years who put in a similar level of effort to their own self-care, teachers try less. I mean, my experiences with teachers is that they do not think in the same ways about spending those hours dedicated to self-care, finding new resources for self-care, thinking up ways that they can more thoroughly self-care in the ways that they think up new ways for lesson plans, or in the ways that they think, how am I working to engage students? But when Adam and Rosie and I were talking about this week, we talked about the importance of self-care and wanting it to be one of the topics that we addressed with y'all, because these things are important. The image that you're looking at there in the slide deck is now, I think, 7 or 8 years old. And it came from the whiteboard during a bargaining session back when I was still a classroom teacher and I was on our union's bargaining team. And we were trying to make the point to the district about where the relief comes. And so during a caucus, I doodled this on the whiteboard, right? And so it's the district standing around with their hands in their pockets and the teachers bearing the weight of all of these competing things, right? This is a 7-year-old image, right? I imagine that that rock would be bigger and have more COVID-related things in it if I were to draw it today. But that, as I mentioned earlier, one aspect of self-care, one and only one, not the only one, right, is thinking about how we can connect with other educators, organize together to improve our working conditions. Right? Contract maintenance is self-care. Filing a grievance is self-care because we are preserving the rights that we have won in our contract or in our MOU. Organizing with other educators in our union is a form of self-care because we are working to win better working conditions for all of us. There are other aspects of self-care. I'm hopeful that you have read about them. We are going to talk about a couple of them. We're also going to talk about how we can be real with our approaches to self-care when we get to the slides on toxic positivity. Hey, there it is.
Yeah. So, you know, we were, I think social media has been really interesting to kind of as a like a window into how sort of different people are experiencing this strain. And one of the responses seems to be like in media and is this sort of this notion of like encouraging kind of toxic positivity. I read an article the other day about a teacher that was continuing to conduct distance learning from her hospital bed, right? And encouraging that, holding that up as an example or as an exemplary behavior, this sort of this idea. And so in the preparation for our talk today, you know, we kind of centered on this notion of toxic positivity. And I don't know, Rosie, did you want to kind of talk a little bit about sort of this aspect?
Yeah, so it's really, this whole bit right here, like just makes me have a lot of feelings because I always feel guilty for not doing more self-care. And then that's like kind of defeating the purpose, right? I also feel really frustrated that when I'm a pretty positive person in general. Like I try not to be really negative and I try to like think about the positive things that are happening. But, you know, if you're having a meeting, it's always like share something positive that happened. And if somebody starts to say something negative, it's like, oh, no, only positive things. And it really is this, I selected this quote right here because it is denying my experience, right? And we're not allowed to have a complete experience. We have to be these teachers with these stoic smiling masks and nothing is wrong. And that feels really terrible. And going a little bit back to the self-care idea, there's a quote, I didn't make it up, but it's like, you know, students can't grit their way out of oppressive conditions and teachers can't self-care their way out of oppressive conditions either. And I feel like That's what we're being asked to do. And it's almost like asking a person who is like, does not have enough money to make ends meet to just save a little. And that's how this feels to me when people are saying like, your teachers are doing a bad job of doing your self-care. Like, yeah, duh, but where am I going to put it? Like in the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. time slot right before I get up with my insomnia. So I feel the need for self-care. Do you want to go to the slide for the tweet that I had included, Adam? Well, can come back to that cheesy girl in a second. Like this Sunday, I did not do my to-do list. I did not do my work. I took my kids to the beach, and I felt almost no guilt about it, right? I still felt a little bit guilty all day. I felt almost no guilt. But then yesterday I had to work a 14-hour day, and that was just my reality. And it's not like to do something extra. Dan was asking me in a meeting that we had, well, how many of these things do you have to do? And how many of these things are you doing because you're choosing to do them? Like, I don't understand that line as a teacher, right? Like like Dan was saying, the teachers that I know, we're all in, and there's not this line of like legally, contractually, here's what I have to do, and here's what I'm choosing to do. Like, it's like we're just doing our jobs, and it's such a big job that like we can't do it all, Dan, did you want to jump in?
I did. We were when I say we, Adam and Rosie and I were having our conversation last week in preparation for today, and we were talking about toxic positivity, and I was thinking about it, have been carrying that thought with me over the last several days, and was thinking about it over the weekend, and thinking about kind of the psychic weight of the last 7 months. I'm not all right. And what we're going through is hard, and the impacts are many, and I feel them. I am hurt by them, as is my wife, as are our kids, as are many of you. And it's okay to not be okay. But that when we think about what self-care is for us, right? And then Adam, I think you captured it well when you talk about, right, deconstructing self-care. Right? Self-care is not what someone else tells you should do to take care of yourself. In so many ways, it's what you need to do. And Rosie, if I may use your example, that's what you needed to do on Sunday, it looks like. For me, it has historically been going to the movies, which I know is one of the reasons that this last 7 months has been harder, because I can't do that. And it is not the same to watch it on Netflix at home for me. And so as we talk about these things, as each of you looks at these slides, as you have your own internal conversation or external conversation about self-care at this moment, I want each of us to remember that it is okay to not be okay, that it is okay to acknowledge the difficulties that you are facing, whether you do them just to yourself or whether you do them with those in your life who you hold closest to you, or whether you do it publicly with your colleagues in the department or across the staff, right? To share what it is that you are going through, because if we are ignoring those things about how we are experiencing this time, we are not fully able to address them. And there are added weights if we ignore some of these things. And so I personally, thinking about it over these last few days, right, assessing where I have been at, right, I wanted to share that with you all. I did find new strategies for what self-care can look like for me in this moment. And shameless plug, one of the ways I went about that in the last 5 days was I looked at that recent issue of the California Educator that talked about self-care ideas. Not because I was looking for someone else to tell me how I was supposed to do it, but I was looking for ideas on what other people are doing and seeing if any of those worked for me. And I want to encourage each of you to look through ideas, to look through your own thoughts and find the things that are going to work for you, because I do hope that each of us can try a little bit more to pay attention to those things if it's something we feel is important.
We had a slide too. Adam, do you want to go back to the cheesy girl?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Only if you tell us how many of these
How am I
you're
doing on each of these? Okay, stop showing up early. I'm often the last car in the parking lot, and I don't want to be. That is not a good thing. Like, I need to get better at that, right? Stop taking work with you everywhere you go. Well, I only go home and here, and I have a computer in both places. So right now it's hard to go anywhere there isn't work. Stop saying yes because you think you should. That one's tricky for me because I also say yes because I want to. Like, I want to do this work. Like, I am passionate about this work. So I'm not saying yes to things because I think I should. I'm saying yes to things because they're projects I'm passionate about and I just don't have the space. No more teacher martyr who works 24/7. I'm trying, people. And then view teaching as a job and know it's okay to stop working. I know that theoretically. I'm working on it. So.
Well, this sort of, you said you're all in, right? Like, your teaching for you is it is a calling, right? And so that's a double-edged sword because you're going to give and you're going to give and you're going to give and you're going to give. So what would your advice to Rosie be about maybe putting some things in place to be able to say at least
people,
yes
give
to
me
a
some
couple of
ideas in the
things?
chat. Like, what's going to be the thing that's going to help me have better limits? Because I want them. Like, I truly do. No teacher martyr. What am I going to do that's a clear thing that will help me have better limits? You guys can go ahead and put that in the chat. And do you want to go to the last? Oh, Dan has one. Yeah.
I've got
Yeah,
one
for sure.
Okay.
Go for it.
that worked for me when I was still in the classroom. When things come up from external sources, department heads or admin, I would ask when and how. So if an administrator says, we really want you to do X, I would say when and how. Showing them that if they want to create new work, that it's going to have to either displace something else or be in addition to. And so my challenge for you, Rosie, is when you're approached with these things, ask someone, right, when and how.
Great, thank you. Did you want to go to the slide with the signs of teacher burnout? It's that one right there. I think this is a really, really helpful graphic. And I would say I have all these. I'm not all complaints, difficulty finding the silver lining. I'm pretty good at that one. But I would say that the other ones are like spot on. And the one particular that I wanted to just talk about, and if you're feeling this as an educator too, that one that says frustrated, not able to affect change, that like sums it all up, because it's one thing to be working this hard and have the results you want, right? It's another thing to be working this hard and have this great lesson, you've researched, you've done all that, and then it falls flat. And then the next day you try all these other things and then it falls flat. And the next day you try all these other things and you hear on Facebook about how terrible teachers are. And like, it's just like so hard to be working so much and have the results be kind of mediocre. And like, I know distance learning is mediocre. I know my class is more mediocre than it was in person. And that feeling right there is just really hard to surmount.
All right. Dan, any final
good.
thoughts? All right. So I wanted to highlight some opportunities and I want to first, thank Rosie and Dan for sort of taking the time to in a couple of sit down and have a conversation and think about what might be some things we want to share and messages and ideas we want to put out into the universe. And sharpening, great, Sandia. And so thank you very much for your time. And then I also wanted to the folks that are in the audience, we do have some opportunities and some resources that I wanted to highlight. One's instructional. So let's start with the instructional. So the CTA Instruction and Professional Development team has been doing a distance learning support series. And we are in the middle of sort of equity in October, and we've been doing some pretty cool stuff around looking at the intersection of equity and instruction. We are going to be wrapping up the month with a series of instructional rounds, wherein we will be inviting participants to attend as students, and you will assume a perspective of a member of a diverse student population and experience a virtual sort of a distance learning lesson from the perspective of that student. And then there will be a debrief. And so we're going to be engaging in instructional rounds. We've got I was just sitting with a with one of the trainers, one of the teachers for the rounds, who's going to be doing a sort of a VR experience of the World's Fair. And so just some really interesting, great stuff, teachers supporting teachers in the language of teachers, which is the lesson. So that is there, it's available. I'll on the slide, I'll drop that link again. I'd also like to point to another resource, which is the distance learning microsite for CTA. And this is a place where you can register for the series I just told you about, the instructional rounds. And you can also see past videos. And you can access the slides and you can watch the videos. You could see, for example, Sandhya is in the audience, and she was part of a presentation here, which was great. It was 3 teachers, 3 grade levels, 3 different sort of focuses of intervention, all kind of talking a little bit about their struggles with conducting intervention in the context of COVID. If you would like to watch the video and submit a reflection, we also do certificates of completion. You can watch past videos. They're organized by theme here. So if you're interested in exploring, for example, this notion of self-care at a deeper level, the social emotional learning piece will take you to part of our Mindful Monday series, which we're doing sort of short 30 minutes. Come learn about the science, the practice of, and using instructionally sort of these principles of mindfulness, as well as some strength-based approaches to professional learning. And I wanted to highlight the self-care and wellness session here from Dr. Will Henson. This is fantastic kind of follow-up to where we left our conversation here today. That's there. Also, last piece, we will be continuing the distance hybrid learning update. We'll put out, if you're part of the session, you will be part of the information going out for the next one on November 10th. More details to come. Thank you very much, John, for showing up to talk a little bit about Prop 15. Thank you, Dan and Rosie. Thank you, members of the audience. We appreciate everything you're doing, and we hope you find some time to sharpen your axe, as it was put in the audience. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day and take care.